Good morning, friends. Welcome back to Acre Homestead. We are going to spend the day in the kitchen together, but first we're going to go downstairs and we are going to weigh our potatoes. The reason we're going to go down there and weigh our potatoes is because I want to use them in tonight's dinner recipes. And I want to know how many potatoes we grew first before I start using them. Tonight's menu that we're going to be cooking, because we have some family members in town and I invited them over for dinner, we're gonna make potato pierogies with caramelized onions, and the recipe doesn't call for sausage, but I think I'm gonna add some sausage to it. I love pierogies. I've never made them, so we're gonna make them together for the first time. We're gonna make creamy cucumber salad because we have cucumbers that just came out of the garden yesterday. And we're gonna make chocolate chip zucchini brownies because I have zucchini I harvested yesterday. And then I probably will slice up a few fresh tomatoes and we'll have those on the side as well. We just got back from being out of town, and you guys saw in the last video where we did a huge harvest. I ripened the majority of the tomatoes on this counter, and I have thrown those tomatoes into the freezer. This is a second harvest here and in these two baskets that I did yesterday just by myself. As soon as we got back from out of town, I ran down to the garden and I grabbed everything that was ripe, including the zucchini and cucumbers that we're going to be using tonight. But last night, my farmer friend who has an organic farm emailed me or called me and said, we have second tomatoes, meaning they're not perfect for selling at farmers markets or to local grocery stores because they have slight imperfections, and I can buy these at a huge discounted rate for canning. And they're perfectly good to can. I mean, look at this tomato, it's perfect, except it's got some marks on the bottom. So we'll just cut that off. And we could slice this up, or this beautiful tomato up, and we could even eat this for dinner. We don't even have to can this. But this morning I ran and I picked these up. Even though I think I am going to grow enough tomatoes this year for Josh and I, because I put up extra tomato products in the previous years to get me through a year, when your local organic farmer calls you and says, do you want some tomatoes at a discounted price? I'm always gonna say yes. So I ran up there and I grabbed these this morning. But what's even better than just getting these tomatoes is I put in a massive order for onions, bell peppers, and hot peppers. And hopefully between what I grew and the order I put in this morning, I will have enough of those things to get us through 1 year. I'm not gonna be picking those up probably for another week or so. So when we pick it up, we'll pick it up together. But for now, we are going to head down into the basement. I'm going to show you how I have been curing / drying my tomatoes, and we're going to weigh them to figure out how many pounds of potatoes, did I say tomatoes? Potatoes we grew this year. So I have my bathroom scale here. We're going to use that to weigh our potatoes. This is how I've been curing the onions and potatoes. I laid cardboard down in the basement because it's cool down here, and I had a fan on them. Those two boxes over there are all of the garlic. All of the windows and doors have these blackout curtains on them. I had the lights off and I had this fan going, and it's been about a week and a half, I think. Yes, since we harvested these potatoes. These potatoes were a little bit damp in some of them in the beds that we harvested, the ones in the roost out, like in-ground area. They weren't damp, but because of that, I wanted to make sure they dried really well. All we're gonna do today is weigh them. I'm gonna let them continue to cure. I also put my onions down here as well. Some of them are already starting to sprout, which means these onions are not gonna last for any length of time. So today I'm going to grab any of the onions that have sprouted and any of the soft onions, and we're gonna use those in tonight's dinner. These are not storage onions, they're Walla Walla onions, and so probably at some point coming up soon, we will preserve all of these onions in a way that they will last, not in a fresh state. When we talk about curing onions or potatoes or garlic or winter squash, it's just a fancy term for drying out. We want to dry out the outer side of the produce so that it won't mold and it will have some longer term storage shelf life. I was always so confused by what does curing mean. It seems like this really complicated, complex process. It's not. All it means is you're drying it out so that it doesn't mold on you. I just placed, like I said, a huge order for onions and red and white onions from my local farmer, 80 pounds of each. So these are ones I'm going to dice up. we're either going to freeze or freeze dry. And the ones that I'm purchasing, because those are storage long-term onions, those are the ones that I'm going to have in the basement down here for fresh eating. But what I want to do now is I want to get these potatoes weighed so that we know how many potatoes we have grown. And then we'll get them laying back out flat to dry. And then we'll go upstairs and make dinner with them. All right, we're probably going to have to do this 4 or 5 times to get the total weight. It says 41.2 pounds. So 41.2 pounds on that, so that's pretty good. I'm going to pour those out and we're going to weigh the rest of them. I want to try not to weigh the same ones twice. .6. These potatoes here are the potatoes that were in the raised bed. These potatoes here are the potatoes that were in the in-ground root stout potato bed. I still have all the potatoes that we planted out in the old chicken run, and I have a bed of volunteer potatoes. So this is just the beginning of the potatoes we're getting, but we need to document it so we know how many we're getting this year. When you are curing or drying out your potatoes, it's very important you do this in a dark environment. Last year, I did this on my back deck patio, and half of them turned green because there was enough UV light, even though they weren't in direct sunlight. They turned green because they were starting to photosynthesize and create chlorophyll. And that can give you a very, very, very upset tummy. It's not the green that gives you the tummy ache, but when there is the presence of green, you know that the other chemical that gives you a very upset stomach is present. And that is why I am doing this in my basement with the lights off, with the blackout curtains, so that I don't run the risk of losing half my harvest to green potatoes again this year. I was pretty devastated and embarrassed about that mistake that I made last year, and I never got around to sharing that, and I wanted to make sure I shared it this year so that none of you make the same mistake I made. 34.8. I'm going to let these to continue to dry until I have all the potatoes cured, the ones from the other beds, and then we'll do some organizing and putting them in nice crates then. But for now, we're going to harvest what we need for dinner tonight. The recipe calls for russet potatoes, which is what I have over here. So I'm going to choose the ones that have blemishes on them, ones that are not going to last as long in storage, just because you want to use those ones up first. There's nothing wrong with this potato to eat it, but it's not going to last long term in storage because it's got a big ding, probably from when we harvested it. So I'm going to look for ones like this, maybe one with a big crack in it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not a russet, but we'll still use it for tonight's dinner. The last thing we need to grab is some garlic. So let's go ahead and get a couple cloves of those, or heads. Let's grab a few of them. We're going to use that for tonight's dinner. I almost forgot to give you the grand total. We got 116.6 pounds of potatoes. And between the raised bed and the roost out bed, there was about, what was it? I'll have to pull it up. I think it was only like a pound or two difference. In the raised bed, which were these potatoes here, the first ones we weighed, we got 59.8 pounds of potatoes. And in those potatoes over there, which were the ones in the roost out bed or the no dig bed, we got 56.8 pounds. So there was only a 2.2-ish pound difference between the raised bed and the roost out or no dig bed. I think for the amount of effort it takes to dig them up, the roost out bed definitely wins. Now, I have been working on that soil for 3 years now at the old house. Here, we're going to be starting brand new. So I still don't know exactly how we're going to be setting up the garden. We're actively working on that right now. But for ease of harvest, roost out definitely wins. And it was only a 2-pound-ish difference. So I think overall, with that little difference of yield, roost out wins overall. We are going to turn this basket into tonight's dinner. Now you might hear Josh around. Today is Labor Day, so he is home and he's going to be working on projects, mostly working on the outlets and switches. But he might spend some time in here cleaning up this mess, so we're going to hang out in the kitchen together today. I got my little workstation over here kind of organized. He needs to organize that up there. But we need the dining room table for dinner tonight. So that is a project he is going to be working on. So while he's in there, we're going to be here in the kitchen having a good time. I have never made pierogies before, so this is not my recipe. I'm going to link this recipe down in the description box. I am going to follow it, and we're going to see how it turns out. The first thing we're going to do is make the dough because it needs to rest for at least an hour. And then while I have my baking supplies out, we will also make our dessert so we can get that in the oven and cooling. Our zucchini brownies. I think that sounds really good and a great way to use up some homegrown zucchini. So we have 2 eggs in there. We're going to add 2 cups of whole milk. And then once we have the brownies in the oven, we'll get going on the pierogi filling. I am doubling the recipe because I want to have enough for dinner tonight and then maybe some leftovers. I just added salt. Now we're going to add 4 cups of all-purpose flour. This is not all the flour that we need, but this is what we're going to start with. Now we need to add 2 more cups of flour. Now this recipe does say to do this in the mixer, but I don't know why I decided not to do it in the mixer. We're going to probably end up having to knead it by hand just a little bit. So I'm going to add 1, and then I'll add the second one in just a minute. We're going to add butter to this at the end, so I probably should have followed the directions and used the mixer, but we'll just get in there with our hands and we'll make hopefully a wonderful, nice dough. During the pantry challenge last winter, I made a year's worth of potato gnocchis as a way to preserve up some of our potatoes that we grew. And this year I would really like to make a ton of pierogies, but because I've never made this before, I wanted to kind of try a smaller recipe first to see how it goes, and then we can make more if we end up really enjoying them. I know I like pierogies, but I just need to know if I like this recipe or not. So I'm going to get in there with my hands and I'm going to mix this up. That's kind of one thing that I've been focusing on this year. Instead of just preserving potatoes, like canning potatoes or preserving them fresh to eat, I kind of like the idea of turning them into things, like turning them into gnocchi, turning them into pierogies. I know I'm going to make a ton of mashed potatoes and freeze dry them so I can have some instant mashed potatoes and make some really, really easy dinners. So preserving them in what the final product will be. And I think that that's kind of a fun concept that I've kind of been wrapping my mind around a little bit this harvest season. So now I have my 3 cups of flour in here, and it says add the 2 remaining cups gradually. Well, I just added them 2 cups at a time, and mix until a soft dough forms. Lastly, mix in your 4 ounces of butter until thoroughly combined. So this is going to take me a second to thoroughly mix in this flour. It seems like that's a lot of flour because we have a lot of dried flour at the bottom here, but we still have to add the butter. This seems like a really weird way to do this, but I'm following the directions mostly. That's definitely letting the flour get mixed in. I think what I'm gonna do is put the rest of this butter in here, mix it in, and then I'm gonna knead it on the countertop. It says that the dough should not stick to the sides of the bowl or your hands. So this is going to be a while of me mixing this in. Oh yeah, this is going to be a nice dough, I can already tell. I'll be here for a while though. This dough is silky and beautiful, and it comes together really well. That's crazy how adding that butter, I was like, there's no way this is gonna come together. I definitely have an arm workout. I've probably been doing this for a good, I don't know, 8 minutes or so. And it said that it should be silky, not sticky, and I think we're there. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna put our dough back in our bowl and cover it. I'm gonna take this and set it just over here while we make our dessert. I need to preheat my oven to 350 degrees. We're gonna make, let's see. You know what we should do? We should get our potatoes and our onions caramelizing and boiling for the filling. Before we make the dessert, no, let's make the dessert. Change my mind again. Let's get these caramelized onions and the potatoes boiling, so while those are boiling and caramelizing, we can make the dessert. I'm gonna wash our onions because they are really, really dirty, and our potatoes. I finally got all these peeled. I've just been putting the peels in here so we can get these washed up. I grabbed a few more onions because I want to make a lot of caramelized onions because we're going to use this for the filling and kind of for the sauce. It's not really a sauce that you put on pierogies, but you use it both for the filling and for the outside part. So it's going to be really good. I don't think you can ever go wrong with too many onions, so we're going to just make a lot of them. When you're caramelizing onions, you always want to cut your onions what is called pole to pole, so from the root end to the blossom end, instead of cutting them this way. So you want to cut them this way. It helps the onions hold together during the caramelization process. This might be more onions than I thought. I still have these. I'm not sure if I'm going to dice these up. I need onions for our cucumber salad. So I'm going to take a few of them and put them in here, and we're just going to use these for the salad so I don't have to chop them up later. Set this aside. And I do think I'm going to go ahead and do kind of like a rough chop on these because I might end up freeze drying some of the mashed potatoes, and there are going to be caramelized onions in them. I don't want big pieces, so I didn't think that through all the way, but I'm going to go ahead and do that now. In here I have some olive oil and butter. This is where we're going to caramelize our onions. I don't know if I'm even going to get all the ones I chopped in this pot. They will cook down a ton. Wow, I did not realize how many onions I cooked, but cut up, but that's okay. I'm going to put a good amount of salt in this, and that'll help draw out the moisture and help caramelize them a little bit faster. And now we're going to get onto the potatoes. I am going to peel these potatoes. I don't always peel my potatoes, but for the pierogi filling, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to not peel them into there. I'm going to peel them over here. The recipe calls for 12 russet potatoes. I don't think I even carried up 12 russet potatoes. So I'm going to have to run down and grab a few extra. I would rather err on the side of too many potatoes because I will preserve or freeze dry whatever we don't end up using for the pierogi dough. I did an initial wash on these, but we need to wash them up real well. And I have enough in here, I think. I'm gonna have to recount, but I'm pretty sure I have enough in here. I'm gonna cut these just a little bit. We have a bad spot on this one, so I'm just gonna cut this out. I wasn't perfect with the skins. There might be a little bit on there, but no worries about that. I'm gonna put cold water in here and we're gonna get this up to a boil and we're gonna make our mashed potatoes that fit perfectly in this pot. And then we'll compost all the potato peels. I don't think chickens will eat potato peels. Oh. I did decide to go ahead and dice or slice up the rest of the onions because if I'm going to go through the effort of making these caramelized onions, I might as well make a bunch and then I'll figure out something to do with them. I think they cook down enough to where I can get them all to fit in here. Might have to put them in here in a couple different sessions. I have all the onions in here and I have this turned really low. You can see the liquid that's coming out of the onions. We have to cook out all that moisture and then we can start caramelizing it. So we're going to do low and slow. I have all this homegrown garlic. We're going to peel it and chop it. It's more than we need for today, but I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit in a dish so throughout the rest of the week I don't have to chop and peel garlic because it's not my favorite thing to do. When I have a little bit more time, we're going to process a whole bunch of that garlic downstairs so that we can have a bunch already pre-processed and it'll just make it easier to use throughout the year. One thing that I have to figure out pretty soon, because I need to get it planted next month because it's already September, it's kind of crazy, is I need to figure out where I'm going to plant our garlic. I planted the garlic last October and that seemed to work pretty well. So what I might end up doing, because I'm not going to have my permanent beds in by that time, is I might find one of those online raised beds. I'm not exactly sure which one, and I'll get that ordered and set up so that I can get my garlic planted. Last 2 years, I've been able to grow a year's worth of garlic for myself, and now I can grow it from seed that I have saved. And I really would be pretty disappointed if I missed out on that opportunity. So I think that's what I'm gonna do for this year's garlic. And then down the road, years down the road, we'll have a more permanent solution. And maybe wherever I end up putting the raised bed for the garlic for this year, I'll turn that into maybe an herb bed or something. So I have to figure out where I wanna put it, because once you set up a raised bed, you don't really want to move it. So that's something that I'm going to have to start really putting some brain power into thinking about. It's awesome. Now I have a ton of garlic that's prepped. I love cooking with fresh garlic, but it's not my favorite thing to peel, so I might as well just prep a bunch of it. Awesome. Okay, so let's get going on the dessert now because I want to get that in the oven. I got out a zucchini that looked like it would be about 2 cups because we need 2 cups of zucchini for these brownies. All I'm going to do is get these shredded up. There's our 2 cups. We have a little extra. I'm going to get this in a freezer bag and we'll save this for a different time. I've never made this recipe before. I will link it down below. I just rechecked the recipe and it doesn't call for eggs, which is kind of interesting. But it does call for 1.5 cups of sugar, so that's what that is. And then we're gonna add 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. This is just a neutral olive oil, it's not an extra virgin. 2 cups of all-purpose flour. I just checked on my potatoes and they are done. They're tender when I put the knife in it. The recipe does say do not overcook them. So before I finish those brownies, I'm gonna get these straining or draining. I did rinse out our colander really well so there wouldn't be anything in it. We're gonna get those potatoes in there. And we're gonna let those steam and release some of that moisture. And then we'll come back to finish the filling after we get the brownies in the oven. We need 1/4 cup of cocoa, which doesn't seem like very much for a brownie. So I'm gonna put 1/4 cup plus maybe 2 tablespoons. Yeah. Just to add a little bit more cocoa, we're gonna put 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. Vanilla, and I still can't believe it doesn't call for eggs. I'm gonna check the recipe one more time. Sugar, oil, flour, cocoa, zucchini, vanilla, salt, baking soda, and chocolate chips. No eggs. Crazy to me. Okay, let's get this mixed up. This just does not seem right to me. This seems very, very dry. Okay, I just reread the recipe and it says it will look like dry sand and that it's gonna look really dry, and that's okay. So I'm gonna trust the process because my instinct is to put 2 eggs in here, but I'm not gonna do it even though I want to. I really, really want to. I am gonna add some chocolate chips. I'm not gonna add as many as it says because I'm not a huge fan of chocolate chips in my brownies. So it calls for 1.5 cups, and I'm probably gonna put maybe 3/4 cup in there. I think it's starting to moisten up a little bit with the zucchini and the flour. And then I need to get out a 9x13. This is what they look like going in. We're gonna bake them. It says for 25 to 30 minutes, and I have a cast iron in here I need to move. We're at a really good spot. We've got our dessert in the oven, our potatoes are done, our dough is resting, our onions are caramelizing away. So let's go ahead and get our cucumber salad done because that's gonna be really easy. We're gonna be able to check that off the list. Hopefully, our onions will be done soon enough. That's one reason why I wanted to get those onions going, because caramelized onions always take forever to caramelize. These are 2 cucumbers I harvested yesterday, right after we got home from the airport. I ran to the garden and I grabbed these beautiful cucumbers. And this is gonna make a really yummy light salad to go along with our dinner tonight. And it'll be really good to sit in the fridge for just a little bit and kind of marinate before dinner. It smells so good. I love the smell of cucumbers. It's so fresh and clean smelling. I'm gonna cut these cucumbers really thinly. We're gonna add these to our onions. We made some quick pickles with onions, sugar, salt, vinegar, and cucumbers in here. I'm gonna use this as part of the dressing. I'm just going to, if I can get the lid off of it, pour some of this brine in here, along with some of these pickled onions. You could just put more vinegar and sugar in here instead of using this, but I didn't feel like getting all those things out. This will go back in the fridge for another time. And these are creamy cucumbers. So we're gonna add a little bit of sour cream. I'm gonna get that toward the bottom to kind of mix that up with the liquid. This is what's gonna make the dressing. We're gonna add some dill. If I had fresh, I'd use fresh. This is dried. A little bit of salt. We're gonna mix that together. I just added a little bit of seasoned salt, and then I'm gonna add just maybe the equivalent of 2 cloves of garlic in there. This salad is so easy to put together. We're gonna give it a taste test. I think it could use a little bit more vinegar, but what I'm gonna do instead of adding that now is I'm gonna put this in the fridge. I'm gonna let it marinate for a bit, and then before we serve dinner, I'll taste it again, and if it needs a little more vinegar, I'll add it then. These onions are taking way too long to cook. I considered putting them in my cast iron for more surface area for the liquid to evaporate off, but I thought, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to go ahead and just kind of spoon some of this liquid off, and then I want to make tomato soup this week, and I will pour this yummy onion broth in that tomato soup, so it's not going to go to waste, but this is going to help expedite the process of these caramelized onions, because we need to get this show on the road. Classic, I forgot to set a timer on the brownies. So I'm gonna feel them. I decided to take the brownies out of the oven. They are coming out pretty clean when I put a toothpick in there. It's not perfectly clean, but I don't want the edges to get overbaked. So we're gonna let that cool. Hopefully those are good. I'm excited to try them, but we'll see how the texture is. That's the biggest test on a brownie. I wanna get the pierogi filling started. This is what's called a potato ricer, and it will give you a really smooth potato mixture. The recipe says that I'm following to use a potato masher, but I want a really, really smooth filling. So I'm going to use my potato ricer to achieve that. And I did salt the potato water when I cooked my potatoes, and I have tasted the potatoes and they have plenty of salt flavor, so I'm not going to add any more salt to this mixture. But if you did not salt your potato water, you would want to salt this mixture here. We're going to add half of the caramelized onions into this mixture, and I'm also going to add, this is not in the recipe, but I've purchased cheese pierogies before. So right here I have some pre-shredded Parmesan cheese. I'm just going to add all that I have, which is probably about 1.5 cups. I always make Parmesan mashed potatoes anytime I make mashed potatoes, so I think that will just add a really nice flavor. It's probably not traditional, but I think it's going to be delicious. I'm still waiting on those onions, so I took the time to unload the dishwasher. I'm going to get it loaded up so that I can have a clean sink. I'm not worried about having a perfectly clean kitchen or house or anything, because it's just family coming over for dinner tonight. But I would like my sink emptied because we're going to be doing a lot of canning projects tomorrow. So if I can work on making my kitchen not a disaster when I wake up to have to deal with it before canning projects, I would prefer to go ahead and just make sure I clean as I go, especially because I think I have another 15 or so minutes on those caramelized onions. I am glad I decided to make all those onions into caramelized onions because I have a lot of potato filling, and I'm going to use all of those onions for the pierogies tonight. But they sure do take a long time to caramelize. Caramelized onions are probably one of my favorite foods. They're so good, but they are a labor of love. Ah! I tasted these onions and they have amazing flavor. They're not as dark as I want for the sauce, but they have good flavor for the filling, and I want to start rolling these pierogies out. So I'm going to put half of those onions in the mixture, and the rest of them we're going to let continue to cook down and get some more color on them. We have our potato mixture. So this has the potatoes, cheese, and now onions, plus the salt from the potato cooking water and the salt from the onions. So before I start stuffing the pierogies, we'll definitely give this a taste test. This is all it calls for, plus a little bit of milk if you need milk to kind of have everything stick together in a cohesive ball. But I added cheese, so I don't think we'll need to add milk, but we won't know until we get this stirred up. We have it all mixed, so I want to give it a taste test. We need to see if that Parmesan cheese was a good addition. I have never put caramelized onions in mashed potatoes, and that is phenomenal. There is no butter, well, other than the butter that was in the caramelized onions, in those mashed potatoes, and those are probably some of the best mashed potatoes I've ever had. Holy Toledo, those are so good. And I'm not even like a huge mashed potato fan. Usually I have to put a lot of cream, Parmesan cheese, which I did put, but I didn't put that much for this entire container. So this is phenomenal. Let's start rolling out our pierogi dough. I also wanted to show you that I did pick up some of the potato mixture and I formed it into a dough ball and it sticks together. So I'm not gonna add any milk or anything to this. I think this is perfect. So now we're gonna roll out our pierogi dough. Josh is home now. He actually went and ran some errands, so he wasn't home. So we'll see him in the background. And it says what we need to do is have a lightly floured surface and cut this dough into half, but we doubled this recipe, so we're gonna cut it into quarters. This dough feels wonderful. It's so soft and supple. I love it. It says to store what you're not using covered so it doesn't dry out. So we're just gonna put it back in our bowl, cover it up. And then it says not to use a ton of flour, but do have a lightly floured surface. And we're gonna roll this out. I have no idea if I'm gonna have way more mashed potatoes than I need or way more dough than I need. But the recipe did say you can make this dough in advance and store it in the fridge. So if I need to make more mashed potatoes, I can, or if I have too many mashed potatoes, I'm gonna freeze dry them. Or we'll just eat them. We could just eat them because they're fantastic. It says to roll to 1/8 of an inch thick. Well, I have some cookie sheets of parchment paper, and this is what we're gonna put our pierogies on once we have them filled and shaped. It says we need to use our 2-inch cookie cutter, which I have these cookie cutters here, and I think this is 2 inches. I'm gonna go measure it. Okay, I found a ruler on my phone because I couldn't find one in the house, and we've got our 2-inch measure. I'm gonna cut a bunch out. I think I'm gonna try to do this in an assembly line. And the recipe does say you can freeze these really well. I think I need some flour on my... They seem a little bit small to me, but I'm gonna do one batch this size and then I might make the next batch a little bit bigger. And then it says to put a teaspoon of potato. I'm gonna try this amount first and see if that's a good amount. Actually, that seems like a good bite-size amount. It's just gonna take a lot longer to make them because they're little. So we have our potato in our center. Maybe I'll put a little bit less. These are little. This dough is nice and supple, so it sticks together really well. But I can see why you wouldn't want to use too much flour, otherwise it's not gonna stick on itself. There's our little pierogi. I love doing projects like this where some might call it tedious, but I really enjoy it because you can kind of get in the zone. It doesn't take a lot of brain power once you get the hang of it, and you can just focus on the task at hand. You can put some music on, an audiobook on, watch your favorite YouTube video or something, and not only do you feel very productive at the end, but when I do projects like this in the kitchen or in the garden, I get to enjoy the fruits of my labor, and we get a delicious meal or byproduct out of that effort, and I absolutely love it. One thing that I did learn after making a few of these is this dough is very supple, and you can roll out quite a bit of it and it's not going to dry out. So instead of cutting this dough into quarters to roll it out, I could have just rolled out the entire amount of dough and worked that way. I found that to be a lot more efficient because then I could cut out a bunch at a time, and I could put the potato on a bunch of at a time, and I could kind of make an assembly line, and that worked really well. Another thing I learned when making these pierogies is that you don't want the dough too thin. When I first started out on this project, I was rolling the dough out a little thin, and I kind of got the hang of it after a bit, and I did roll it just a little bit thicker, and I definitely liked the little bit larger size pierogies. So moving forward making them, I will make the little bit larger ones, because you cut them in half, even those smaller ones I made, in order to take a bite. And so just for ease of the time it takes to make them, I definitely liked the little bit larger size pierogies. Oh, I want to show you what the caramelized onions are looking like. They're getting nice, good color. This is exactly what we want. They are almost done. I think I'm going to turn this off because if I have my back to this, I'm going to forget, and that would be tragic to burn this. We have 3 trays, or 2 3/4 trays. I just on accident locked my dog outside, so he's barking, so Josh will let him in just a second. And then I've got this mess to clean up. I used all the dough except for this amount of dough, so we did pretty good. But we have way more potatoes than we needed for the pierogies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze dry it, like I mentioned earlier. If you double this recipe, the pasta recipe, you don't need to double the filling recipe, because I definitely have more potatoes here than I needed, but I'm okay with that because I do want to try this freeze-dried potatoes. I'm going to make instant mashed potatoes, so all I'll have to do is add water with homegrown potatoes. I'm going to throw this in the freezer. Since I have my freeze dryer going, it might actually almost be done. Josh tasted these mashed potatoes and he said they were so good. I think that caramelized onion, like I was saying, is really a good thing to put into mashed potatoes. Who would have thought? I never would have done that. So Josh is replacing behind us the hardware, which I haven't showed you guys. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. The new hardware we're putting on the doors. It's beautiful. I absolutely love it. So he's replacing one of the knobs right now as we speak while I clean up my huge mess. It is 5:34 right now, and I said they could come over anywhere between 6:30 and 7. So I still need to cook the, what are those called, pierogies, and then I need to set the table. So I'll set the table first, then we'll cook the pierogies. We need to taste test everything. The brownies is mostly what I want to taste test. Maybe I'll have Josh do that. But what I was saying was I thought I was going to have time to get all those tomatoes cooking down in one of my roaster pans. But I think by the time, that was a little too ambitious in my mind. I might do it tonight after dinner. I say that, but I'll probably be too tired. I would like the tomatoes to cook down overnight so that in the morning they'll be ready for me. That's kind of why I wanted to get them started, but we'll just see how the afternoon goes, or evening. Let me see if I can get this cleaned up. Now, I want to look at the recipe because it says these freeze up really nice, and we are not going to go through all of those for dinner tonight. So it says to freeze the pierogies on a well-floured baking sheet. We have that for 3 to 4 hours or until fully frozen. Transfer to a Ziploc bag and store for up to 1 month. When ready to cook, do not thaw. Put frozen pierogies in boiling water and cook for 3 to 4 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this entire tray into the freezer. And this will be at least 2 meals for Josh and I with leftovers. And so that's pretty exciting. Hopefully, after today's taste test, we really enjoy these. I just emptied the freeze dryer trays before we left. I had cooked up some green beans with some butter and garlic from the garden, and we didn't get to them all, so I just freeze dried them. Taste it.
Well, I already took a bite, but
Oh.
I was expecting to be cold for some reason.
Oh my gosh, they taste like veggie straws, but better.
It's really good.
This is crazy. I mean, this is way healthier than a veggie straw because it's literally the cooked green beans we made together, a little bit of butter, garlic from the garden, salt and pepper.
It's crazy how crunchy they are.
They're very
Very
crunchy.
crunchy.
Okay, so Josh is putting on that piece of hardware. Let me show you on a different doorknob what it looks like. It is black with kind of like a square handle and a rectangle. I don't even know what this piece is called. And we did the 22-degree open. So instead of it going like 68 degrees, it's 22. So it's really nice. You like it, Orbit? Do you like the new doorknobs? Yeah? All right, I gotta get back to work cleaning this counter because it is gross. I did throw in the mashed potatoes into just the freezer so the mashed potatoes can freeze before we freeze dry it. And then I need to get those green beans right there into a container. And these pierogies are going straight into the freezer. It is time to get the table set, and half of my stuff is still in boxes. I have not unpacked it yet for my table decor, but I was able to find some stuff so I could throw a fun tablescape together. And this feels like the mark of a new era. I love to entertain. I used to have dinner parties all the time. And then the craziness of 2020 hit, and I decided to start a YouTube channel. So between me working 2 full-time jobs, Josh getting his bachelor's degree at the beginning of 2020, and all that entailed, entertaining and hosting people took a huge back seat. And now that I am having my first official, what I would call dinner party at my house, this feels like the start of a new chapter where I can invite people into my home and I can kind of have a slow day just in the kitchen, enjoying preparing a delicious meal and then getting to enjoy that meal with my favorite people. So now that we have the table set, I'm going to finish putting the dinner together. One of the sides we're going to have are just some tomatoes. I shouldn't say just because these are stunning tomatoes and they really don't need anything done to them except a little bit of salt we'll sprinkle on the top, and this is going to make a perfect side dish. When you are dealing with beautiful produce, you really don't need to do a lot to it, and that is something we can enjoy tonight for dinner. Now, everyone has arrived, so I'm going to go ahead and get the pierogies boiled up. I have a pot of water here. I didn't even salt this water because our pasta is salted and our potato mixture is salted. I probably, looking back, should have maybe put a little bit of salt in the water, but they turned out just fine. So the recipe says to boil these for 3 to 4 minutes, and once they floated to the top, that took a few minutes. I let them boil for a couple more minutes and then they were done. And I just scooped them out with a colander. I put them into this wooden bowl. This is just my salad bowl with a little bit of butter. This is some delicious grass-fed butter, so it's adding some great flavor, but it is also just in there to help them not stick together. I cook them in 2 batches because I didn't want to overcrowd and drop the temperature of the water too much. So that is why I decided to cook these in 2 different batches. While I was cooking up the pierogies, I asked Josh if he would open up a bottle of wine for our guests, and he went ahead and did that and served it. We opened a bottle of red and a bottle of white, and it was just depending on which people preferred. I also cooked up, while I was setting the table, a couple pounds of sweet Italian sausage so that I could have a little bit of leftovers for making a meal later in the week. And I peppered up this pierogies. This is all the pepper I had in my entire house. So I decided to pepper up the pierogies on top so they could have some delicious flavor. I hope you guys enjoyed hanging out with me today in the kitchen as we turned our garden fresh onions, garlic, potatoes, cucumbers, and tomatoes into a delicious dinner. If you want to watch a few more of my videos, I can certainly pop those up right here. And I want to say a huge thank you for spending time with me in my kitchen. I greatly appreciate every single one of you.